Hey folks, we are in 1 Samuel today. I'm looking at chapter 8 through chapter 11. Excuse me. And we're looking at a major shift or something new happening in the grand scheme of the story, the entrance of the first king of Israel. Now we've been kind of transitioning there. The book of Judges looked forward or looked back from a time where there was no king in Israel. And so that book, the kind of tone of the book of Judges kind of looks forward to some stability of having a king. And as we'll see here, it's not all a good thing, but it's something that happens. And so let's look at this text and wrestle with what's going on. So I think officially chapter 8 was in yesterday's reading, but I wanted to kind of keep it as a section thinking about this king today. And I believe chapter 11 brings us up to date with our reading. So chapter 8 begins this way. When Samuel, so we learned all about Samuel's story yesterday. So if you're not familiar with Samuel, we have his before his birth story. A lot of his story is in the reading that was in yesterday's video. Now he's old. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders, right? Or judges. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So we have this strong theme now of you can't count on generations to necessarily be faithful. Remember Eli? His sons, we looked at yesterday, were really messed up. Now, Eli seemed decent, but he didn't stop his sons from doing that, and God holds him accountable for that. Samuel, again, provides a contrast to the sons of the priest. But now his sons don't follow in his ways and God's ways either. So maybe this ought to be telling us that family-based ministry in and of itself is not a great idea. What I mean by family-based is I mean the children taking over for the father, so to speak. Now, if they were people of character and faith, they trust and follow God, then it's great. But if they don't, just being a family member is not sufficient, right? You've got to trust and follow God. And if both those things can come together, great. But if not, just being the family isn't it. And the people generally recognize that, unsurprisingly, right? So in verse 4, so all the elders of Israel came together and said to Samuel, "You're old." You love how direct they are. "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as the other nations have." So they want a king. It ought probably to strike us that this idea of "as the other nations have" isn't really a great motivation. They're supposed to be a holy nation, right? A kingdom of priests set apart, set aside from the other nations, not like the other nations. But that's what they want. And in verse 6, we're told that when they said this, it displeased Samuel. Samuel was not happy with that. We're not told exactly why, if it was more in relation to rejecting his kids or the idea of a king itself, perhaps. But he didn't like that request very much, so he prayed about it. Good thing to do, right? And the Lord told him, listen, this is really an important section in the big, narrative of Scripture and as it moves forward here. Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Okay? So Samuel feels, I guess that gives us a pretty good clue, right? Samuel feels maybe personally rejected in some ways. But God says they've rejected me as king, right? So the idea is they don't need a king. Why? Because God is their king. Whenever you get a human ruler, monarch involved, the more potential for corruption happens. But when they're oriented towards God Himself, then that's really was Plan A. And so Plan B, well, I don't know if that's fair to say that about the king. It gets a little complicated because in other places it's different. But ultimately, as the story goes, we have this double thing about, okay, God should be king, but now there's a human king coming into play, which is less than God being king. But it's a significant storyline, and God will make covenant promises to David as king that his kingdom will endure forever. So this kingship thing doesn't go away. It's not like, all right, we'll try it. Didn't work out. Forget it. No king. No. And I'm getting way ahead of myself. We should just kind of wait and let the story unfolds as it unfolds. But ultimately, we know where we're going. Is Jesus, is God king? Yes, because Jesus is divine. Is there a human king? Yes, because Jesus is human. So Jesus is the perfect king whose kingdom will never end, but who rules with justice because he's God. So it's a cool, of course, fulfillment of the story. Verse 8, this is God's voice talking still. As they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them. This is interesting. Listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. So Samuel goes into some detail about it, and it's pretty substantial about what they can expect. He's kind of saying here, count the cost. But much like as it happens oftentimes when people want what they want and they're not really thinking about the potential cost. So they say in verse 19, they refuse to listen to Samuel. Okay. So that kind of indicates to us that it's not like they're really hearing what he's saying. They're just saying, we want what we want. Stop talking and let us have what we want. No, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations. Again, ought to be a clue. That's not a great motivation. With a king to lead us and go out before us and fight our battles. Verse 21, Samuel heard all that the people said. He repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. So chapter 9, we have the first king, who is a man named Saul. He's verse 2 of chapter 9, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. And he was a head taller than anyone else, right? He looks the part. Okay. And there's a story of how he sort of could seem in a way, as the story kind of starts, accidentally is chasing some lost donkeys, and then they know Samuel's here, so they go to Samuel to try to get some answers. But meanwhile, God has a plan in mind, right, for Saul to be the first king. So he says down in verse 15, chapter 9 still. Now the day before Saul came, and the Lord revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. Verse 17, when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. So this is kind of cool way to think about or kind of wrestle with the situation of how we kind of do things with it. And there's no indication here that Saul and his assistants and etc. are doing anything against their will. They're doing what seems to them that they ought to do or want to do. And in the meantime, God is at work somehow in the midst of that to bring Saul and Samuel together. Whether that's foreknowledge or how that works or what, it's not exactly spelled out, but it's kind of cool how things come together. So in chapter 10, do I want to say anything about chapter 9? Chapter 9, so Saul starts humble, 9:21, but I am not a Benjamin. Am I not a Benjaminite from the smallest tribe of Israel? Who am I? I'm not anybody important. So that's a good start. Doesn't necessarily end very well for Saul, but it's a good start that way. So in chapter 10, verse 1, Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" So this idea of anointing was literally done with oil, but the word for anoint is mashach, and the word for anointed one is Mashiach, or what will become to us the word Messiah. So what does Messiah mean? When we hear that word, we apply it only to Jesus usually, but Saul was a Messiah, an anointed one. So Aaron the priest was also an anointed one. Saul and later David, right, as a king, will be anointed ones or messiahs. So there's a connection there that will again move us forward in the story and set up some expectations for Jesus. And when he's called Messiah, what does that mean? How does it relate? How is it similar? How is it different? We'll deal with all that, of course, as it comes. But I just want to give you I want to mention here where this anointed one and Messiah comes up so that we can track with the story as it unfolds. So Saul is made king. There's some cool things in here. Like in chapter 10, verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them, these other guys that are speaking God-inspired words, right? And you will be changed into a different person. Wow, that's an interesting statement, interesting translation there, right? Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. Yeah, cool story. And then Saul has a military victory. He calls together very kind of boldly as a leader all the tribes of Israel to fight off an offensive maneuver. So at the end of chapter 11, Saul is confirmed as king. Verse 14, then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew his kingship." So all the people went to Gilgal and made Saul king in the presence of the Lord. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings before the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites held a great celebration. So we're going to have a short one today that really covers what I wanted to cover in that. But this is a major moment in the big picture narrative. We're always looking big picture, right? And so what I'm challenging you to hopefully be able to do as time goes on is to be able to tell the overarching story through these books that we've discovered so far. And this is this kind of transition away from the time of the judges and kind of the last and maybe in a sense best judge, Samuel, is the one who kind of passes the baton off. God uses to anoint the first king of Israel, Saul. And wrestle a little bit with this idea of the people wanting a king isn't necessarily a great thing, but it becomes the way that God will work through to bring about, the big picture story. More about that to come. I think in Chronicles, when we get there in a bit, we'll see a little bit of a different perspective on the desire for kingship, but we're not there yet. So again, just make sure we're tracking with the big picture of what's going on in the narrative as it unfolds here in the story. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, and I hope to see